He puts in the book something he calls Russell's Law, which is the resistance to new ideas increases with the square of their importance. And I think of this too for, being an agricultural professional, in quotes here, as people get invested in their paradigm, their working paradigm, the conventional paradigm here, there is a lot of resistance to change. Nobody likes admitting that there was a better way, a better road to take, and they didn't take it. So there's a number of reasons why there was the resistance. Also, an interesting thing he pointed out was he called it the NIH factor, for not invented here. And I encountered this a lot with distributing information on organic agriculture. The entities out there, Extension Service and that would not use materials we developed, even though we were part of a federal project, because it didn't come through their university. And that was the excuse, we didn't do the work, so we're not interested in what you learned. Another thing I wanted to comment on, the work that they did. I started with the pest control part of this because that's what everybody remembers. But at least half of the work or more focused on vitalizing the plants, building up plant immunity to pests and diseases, just increasing yield, whatever they needed to do radionically. And it's one of the interesting things, and I've heard mention of this sort of treatment in discussions today. They described as recycling of a plant's own radionic frequencies, basically broadcasting the healthy pattern back, recycling that way. But what's interesting is I often wonder, what is it about us that we get more excited about the idea of zapping pests than we do about vitalizing, the plants? Is too much testosterone, too much spike TV, or something like that. But it made me wonder, because I think this is the notion that most people have of how radionics worked for pest control. That, you got a pest, you get on your instrument, you put a pesticide in there or whatever, and get out there and you zap the insect. Well, I'm not sure there isn't some validity to that, but, sort of staying on it though, that particular idea, I took a look at the original book 1 here that Ed's dad had published. And in this book, and I don't have it listed there, but Ed talked about it, so you know where you can get it. There's a great interview with a fellow named Leslie Aiken. And to me, this interview is one of the best summaries of the ideas behind agricultural radionics. There's just some specific things in there that I thought were real interesting, because the question had come up, do you just find insect corpses on the ground? And what he said, in more complex organisms, you'll have some remnants, but in the simple ones, they just go back to their native materials like water and basic energy. Now, it makes it sound like he's thinking very much of the zapping concept, but I'm taking this a little out of context because the interview goes on to explain a greater depth of understanding and something more along these lines. What I'm calling the homeopathic concept of radionic pest control, in which the crop is what is being treated and vitalized to make it unsuitable for the pests. There's a notion, this comes out of sort of the organic community, the sustainable community. And I talked about it a lot last year. The idea that insects in particular are like the garbage men in nature. They focus on removing the weakened, imperfect plants out there in the system. And that's basically the idea behind this type of control. And there's an interesting quote out of The Secret Life of Plants that helps support this. It says, because the amount of reagent used, and in this case we're talking about those botanical pesticides that they used as reagents, it may have functioned like a homeopathic dose, treating the plant to make it immune to the pest rather than attacking the pest directly. The information in Secret Life of Plants, which sometimes looks a little fluffy from the outside, there's some incredible information in that book. And I'm so glad I got to develop this presentation, because I got to go back and find this information that I'd really kind of forgotten about. And these ideas, moving sort of beyond radionics and subtle energy theory, there are schools of thought, like I said, in the organic community and sustainable community about these ideas. And many of them, this is a book that I referred to a lot when I talked about it last year, found that the stresses that go to weakening crops, making them vulnerable to insects and diseases, are often what they call agrichologenic. They come from our farming methods, using salt fertilizer, applying pesticides, overspray of fungicides. Actually, the synthetic fungicides particularly will make plants more vulnerable to insects. They actually weaken it. I mean, pesticides are biocides, they're a poison. It's kind of like the side effects that you get from medicines. Same notion. And by the way, if you're interested in what we had to say last year, because I talked almost entirely about this issue, you can support USPA by buying a copy of last year's presentation. It's Organic Farming, Facts, Fabrications, and Radionics. And these notions, that come from our conventional paradigm, one of them is, if you grow a crop, well, the pests are just automatically going to come. Well, we need to rethink that, because we know in a lot of cases now there is more scientific evidence that that is not always the case. And another idea that we get, or have gotten, and I get this mostly from some real nozzlehead farmers and chemical salesmen, that when you have a pest, that's just pesticide deficiency. If you've got weeds, that's a Roundup deficiency. And you think the bullshit gets piled deep on organic farms. Nothing compared to this. At least on organic farms, it's fertilizer. You usually don't think of the Delawares in Britain, these early pioneers, as being involved so much in agricultural radionics. But they did a lot of work with plants. And this came out again in Russell's book. Among the more interesting things, he was looking a lot at critical rotation position. If you know anything about Abrams and his discovery of radionics and that, if you remember the subjects in that he would work with or use for detection, he would get the best response when that person was facing a certain direction. Well, that's the critical rotation position. You have the same thing with plants. They will do better if they're rotated in the right position, which, means nothing when you're planting seeds out in the field. I mean, they're going to grow oriented correctly if they emerge that way. But not when you got transplants like tomatoes or peppers that are grown in a greenhouse and got to take them out to the field. So, what I did the last few years when I was growing my own transplants is we plant them in the greenhouse, and I'd mark the ends of the flats. I'd mark the north side. So when we take them out to harden the plants, always keep them oriented properly. When we take them to the field, we'd set it on the ground so it was oriented properly, and try as much as we could to always orient the transplants. Something you can do pretty easy on a gardening level. For larger field crop production, I can see problems, but it's interesting. That work came from the Delawares. They did a lot of interesting work with horticultural plants, and reading through their methods, they had good scientific methods, better than what I'd read about on the American work at that time. I mean, they would dig up whole areas of ground, mix them together, put them back, so that there would be no basic differences on these plots they were comparing. That's a lot of work. But they really refined their methods. And it was a result of some of their work with plants, because they got excellent results on vitalizing crops, improving yields and that. But what they noticed when they tried to cooperate with the university to duplicate that work, they weren't able to duplicate their results. And this gets back to something that, again, we heard this morning in Ludi and Linda's presentation, is how important the operator is in these things, because it's not, the instrument is the operator. You have tools out there. Our instruments are training wheels for our minds and our hearts. But that came from Delaware, and I had not known that before. Another pioneer in agricultural radionics, Thomas Gale and Hieronymus,